Imagine, if you will, a deserted bus station, etched in the gloom of an unlit street. The air is heavy, laden with an uneasy silence that hangs over the area like a shroud. The bus station, once a bustling hub of activity, now stands as a hollow echo of its past, its emptiness more haunting than any ghost story you've heard. The wind whistles through the deserted platforms, carrying with it the palpable chill of abandonment and uncertainty. In the midst of this desolation, a solitary figure emerges. A young girl, barely out of her teens, stands alone under the flickering glow of a lone street lamp. Her breath fogs in the cold air, the only evidence of life in this forsaken place. She looks around, her eyes darting to the shadowy corners of the station. Her heart pounds in her chest, each beat echoing the seconds that tick away in the deafening silence. She waits for the bus that seems to have forgotten this stop. The schedule, faded and weather-worn, clings to the station wall, a forgotten relic of a time when this place wasn't so desolate. Her fingers trace the timetables, the ink barely visible under the layer of grime and time. Her bus should have been here by now, but the road remains empty, the only sound the distant howl of the wind. She pulls her coat tighter around her, her breath coming out in short, frosty bursts. It's cold, colder than it should be. A sudden gust of wind sends a shiver down her spine, rustling the fallen leaves and sending them skittering across the deserted platforms. She can't shake the feeling that she's not alone, that she's being watched. Her instincts scream at her to leave, but she stays put, rooted to the spot by a mix of fear and determination. As I stood there, a chill ran down my spine. Something felt off, but I couldn't put my finger on it. It was then I felt it, a gaze, heavy, piercing, and when I turned around I saw them, two glowing red eyes in the dark. The eyes were like two fiery orbs, radiating an unnatural crimson glow. They were mesmerizing, yet terrifying. Their gaze bore into me, an unspoken promise of malice that sent chills down my spine. The darkness around these eyes seemed to pulsate with an eerie rhythm, as if it were alive, a dark entity that was a part of, yet distinct from, the red-eyed stranger. The stranger didn't move, didn't speak. There was only the steady, rhythmic glow of those two red eyes, growing brighter with each passing second. They were the only source of light in the otherwise pitch-black bus station, casting long, distorted shadows that danced and twisted in the corners of my vision. I could feel my heart pounding in my chest, each beat echoing in my ears like a drum. Fear, raw and primal, surged through my veins, setting my nerves on edge. My instincts screamed at me to run, to escape the hypnotic gaze of the red-eyed stranger. But my feet refused to move, as if they were rooted to the spot. I was like a deer caught in the headlights, paralyzed by the intense gaze of the predator. I could sense the anticipation in the air, a tangible tension that seemed to hold its breath along with me. The silence was deafening, the only sound my own ragged breathing, growing more frantic with each passing second. It was a tense standoff, a game of cat and mouse where I was the terrified prey, trapped in the mesmerizing gaze of the predator. Then, slowly, the red eyes began to advance, cutting through the darkness like a pair of bloody moons. Each step was measured, deliberate, heightening the dread that had settled in my gut. I could do nothing but watch as the red-eyed stranger drew nearer, the distance between us shrinking with every passing moment. I stood frozen, my breath hitched in my throat as the red eyes drew closer. Suddenly, adrenaline kicked in, and I ran, my heart pounding like a drum in my chest. The world around me blurred as I dashed down the deserted street, my breaths coming out in sharp gasps. The eerie glow of the lampposts cast long, monstrous shadows that twisted and danced on the pavement. My footfalls echoed in the silent night, a chilling symphony of fear. Every rustle, every whisper of the wind sent icy tendrils of terror down my spine. The once familiar streets now seemed alien and menacing, a labyrinth designed to trap me with my fear. I could hear the relentless pursuit of the red-eyed stranger, his footsteps a haunting echo of my own. The steady rhythm of our chase was a chilling reminder that I was not alone. I could feel him closing in, his presence a looming shadow behind me. The air grew colder, the shadows deeper, the silence more profound. I could almost feel his gaze, those fiery red eyes burning a hole in my back. I ran faster, my legs protesting, my lungs screaming for air. But the fear of what lay behind me propelled me forward, turning every whisper of pain into a cry of determination. My mind was a whirlwind of panic and desperation. I knew I had to lose him, to outsmart him, but how? My heart pounded in my ears, each beat a countdown to my impending doom. I turned a corner, hoping to lose him in the maze of narrow alleys. But the echo of his footsteps grew louder, closer. The world seemed to tilt, my foot catching on an unseen obstacle. Time seemed to slow as I tumbled to the ground, the rough asphalt scraping against my skin. My vision swam, the world spinning around me. I tried to move, to get up, but my body refused to cooperate. My heart hammered in my chest, a primal fear taking hold. As I turned the corner, I tripped and fell, my world spinning as I hit the ground. The last thing I saw before everything went black were those terrifying red eyes. I woke up in a cold sweat, my heart still pounding, the memory of the red eyes fresh in my mind. It felt as real as the chill seeping into my bones, a cruel reminder of the terror I'd just endured. Breathing deeply, I attempted to shake off the fear, convincing myself that it was just a dream, a figment of my imagination, a phantom of the night. As I rose from the bed, the lingering remnants of my nightmare clung to me like a second skin. I could still feel the icy tendrils of fear coiling around my heart, the echo of footsteps in my mind, the sinister gaze that seemed to pierce through me. I approached the mirror, seeking the comfort of my own reflection. I yearned for the familiar, the mundane, the ordinary. But what I found was far from it. Or was it? Because as I looked in the mirror, I saw a reflection that wasn't mine, and in that reflection, two glowing red eyes stared back at me.
Have you ever felt watched in a crowded place? Picture this, a day like any other, with the usual hustle and bustle. But today I was off schedule, running late. It was an odd sensation, like the world was out of sync and I was a step behind. My stomach growled, an unexpected hunger gnawing at me. As I walked down the familiar streets, a new sight caught my eye. A restaurant, seemingly materializing out of nowhere. Curiosity piqued, I decided to try it out. Entering the restaurant, the ambiance was almost tangible, a blend of warmth and something off. Something I couldn't quite place. The soft clinking of utensils, the murmur of conversations, yet there was an inexplicable chill in the air. I felt like an intruder, an outsider in a place I shouldn't be. And then as I sat down, I felt it. The prickling sensation of being watched. Ever had the feeling of eyes boring into you even when you can't see them? That's what happened to me that night. I was sitting in a restaurant, the hum of conversation around me fading into a dull murmur as I became acutely aware of a presence. An unseen gaze, seemingly fixated on me. A shiver ran down my spine like an icy finger tracing the curve of my back. The air around me felt heavier, as if charged with a strange, unsettling energy. Was it my imagination playing tricks on me, spurred by the late hour and my fatigue? Or was there really someone or something watching me? I tried to shake off the sensation, to attribute it to mere paranoia. I busied myself with the menu, letting my eyes wander over the list of dishes, but the words blurred together, making no sense. The taste of unease lingered on my tongue, more potent than the strongest spice. The restaurant, once filled with the comforting sounds of clinking cutlery and soft chatter, now seemed eerily silent. Each tick of the clock on the wall echoed in my ears, a harsh reminder of my solitude in the face of this inexplicable fear. I tried to focus on my meal, to lose myself in the flavors, but the food tasted bland, the textures unappealing. Each bite felt like a chore, my appetite lost to the oppressive feeling of being observed. I could almost sense the eyes on me, cold and judgmental, prying into my very soul. I tried to laugh it off, to convince myself I was overreacting, but the laughter died on my lips, replaced by a cold dread that gripped my heart. The feeling of being watched didn't wane, it only intensified. Each passing second was a confirmation of my worst fears. No matter how much I wanted to deny it, to bury my head in the sand and pretend it was all a figment of my imagination, I couldn't. The truth was undeniable, as real as the food on my plate and the chair beneath me. I could no longer ignore it. Someone, or something, was staring at me. What do you do when you feel a presence but see nothing? A question I found myself pondering as I turned around to confront whatever it was that had been observing me in that dimly lit restaurant. The chair across from me was as empty as the silence that filled the room, yet I couldn't shake off the sensation of being watched. In that moment, I was trying to convince myself that it was just my imagination playing tricks on me. After all, How could there be a presence without a form? But every instinct within me was screaming otherwise. I could feel the hair on the back of my neck stand on end, a cold sweat trickling down my face. The atmosphere around me felt dense, as if the air itself had turned to gelatin. It was a peculiar sensation, one that I had never experienced before. It was as if an unseen specter had draped itself around me, its cold, ethereal touch sending shivers down my spine. A sense of dread washed over me. It was a fear that was not born out of the known, but the unknown. There was an uncanny stillness that had settled in the room. The usual hum of the refrigerator, the occasional clatter of dishes from the kitchen, the distant murmur of the city outside, all had been swallowed by the eerie silence. It was as if time itself had paused, waiting with bated breath for the unseen to reveal itself. I tried to shake off the fear, to convince myself that it was all in my head, but the feeling of being watched, of being hunted, persisted. It was relentless, a constant reminder that I was not alone. I could feel it, the eyes on me, watching, waiting. Yet when I looked around, there was no one. The restaurant was empty, the chairs and tables untouched. The only sign of life was the flickering light from the street lamp outside, casting long, ominous shadows on the empty chairs. I was alone in the restaurant, but not alone in my fear. This realization chilled me to the bone. It was a chilling reminder of the unseen specter that lingered in the shadows. A presence felt, but never seen. Ever discovered something that you wish you hadn't? The chill in the air seems to tighten around me, constricting my lungs as I rise to leave the restaurant. An eerie silence has descended, the once bustling atmosphere now reduced to a mere whisper. My heart pounds in my chest, a frantic rhythm echoing in my ears. I can't shake off the feeling of being watched, a sensation that's been gnawing at me since I first sat down in this forsaken place. As I reach the exit, a glimmer in the corner of my eye gives me pause. I turn, my gaze landing on the restaurant's window. The glass, blackened by the night, reflects back an image that roots me to the spot. There, staring back at me, are the same eyes that have been relentlessly piercing into me. A cold realization begins to seep into me, a horrifying truth that sends a shiver down my spine. Those eyes, they are my own. The stranger I felt watching me, the unseen specter that had me on edge, was none other than my own reflection, a distorted mirror-like image staring back at me from the depths of the glass. It's as though my own fears and insecurities have taken a form of their own, casting a sinister shadow over my evening. The terror that grips me is not of some external phantom but one of self-discovery. It's the realization that the fear we often attribute to the unknown, to the unseen, can sometimes be a reflection of our own inner demons, our minds, masters of deception, conjuring images and sensations that seem all too real. I step out into the night, the chilling wind biting into my skin, the horrifying truth still echoing in my mind. The haunting stare was my own, a reflection of my own fears and anxieties, a stranger within me. The phantom that had been watching me was not some specter lurking in the shadows, but a manifestation of my own psyche, a mirror image of my own dread. The stranger watching me was me all along. Have you ever been so engrossed in a book that the world around you ceases to exist? Well, this is a story about a woman who was just like that, and a man who couldn't help but notice. Our narrative unfolds on a seemingly endless train journey, marked only by the rhythmic, hypnotic click-clack of the train on the tracks. In the midst of this monotonous voyage, there she sat, a woman utterly absorbed in the pages of her book, oblivious to the passing stations, the changing landscapes, and the shifting faces. Her focus was unwavering, her solitude unquestionable. It was as if she had erected an invisible barrier around herself, one that no one dared to breach. Then there was him, the man sitting next to her, drawn in by this enigmatic woman. His curiosity piqued. He watched her, fascinated by her apparent disinterest in everything but her book. There was something about her that drew me in, something I couldn't quite put my finger on. I've always been one to respect a good book, but curiosity got the better of me. I turned to the woman sitting beside me, her eyes still buried in the pages of her book. "Excuse me," I began. "I couldn't help but notice your book. What's it about?" For the first time since we'd boarded the train, she lifted her gaze from the pages, offering me a polite but somewhat guarded smile. "It's a bit complicated," she began, her voice a soft murmur over the rhythmic clatter of the train. "It's a story of strangers on a journey much like us." Intrigued, I pressed on, "What kind of journey?" Her smile waned slightly, replaced with an expression I couldn't quite place. "A journey through the unknown," she replied cryptically. "It's a tale of two strangers who meet on a train, their lives intertwining in ways they never imagined." The conversation took an eerie turn as she continued. "The story unfolds in a series of strange events. The train stops at half a dozen stations, but they remain seated, engrossed in their conversation. As the journey progresses, they start to realize that they're not just passengers on a train, but players in a much larger, darker game." Her words hung in the air, casting a chill over the cabin. I glanced at the book, its cover shrouded in shadows from the dim overhead light. It was an unsettling feeling, the way reality seemed to blur with fiction. "The plot seems very specific," I commented, trying to shake off the unease. "Does it end well?" She looked at me then, her eyes reflecting a strange intensity. "That," she said, her voice barely above a whisper, "depends on the choices they make." The more she spoke, the more I realized the uncanny resemblance between our situation and the story she was narrating. The train rumbled on, the shadows playing tricks on my mind, and I found myself wondering just how much of our conversation was mere coincidence. I was drawn into the chilling narrative she spun, feeling a growing sense of unease. The woman's voice, steady and calm, echoed in the confined space of the train car. She began to reveal the plot twist of her book, her words painting a vivid picture that sent shivers down my spine. The stranger on the train, the one you least suspect, turns out to be a ruthless serial killer. He's been traveling from town to town, leaving a trail of victims in his wake. I could feel the hairs on the back of my neck standing on end. The coincidence was uncanny, the similarity between our situation and the book's plot too close for comfort. I tried to laugh it off, to dismiss the creeping dread that was clawing its way up my throat. "That's quite a twist," I managed to choke out, my voice sounding strange and hoarse to my own ears. But the woman continued to read, her eyes never leaving the page, completely unfazed by my growing discomfort. Her voice remained steady, her tone unchanging as she delved deeper into the horrifying tale. She spoke of the killer's cold, calculating nature, of his ability to blend into the crowd, to appear as just another faceless passenger. The train rattled on, the rhythm of the tracks beneath us providing a haunting soundtrack to her tale. Each word she spoke, each detail she revealed, only served to heighten my fear. I found myself glancing around the train car, paranoia seeping into every corner of my mind. Was this just a story, or was it a warning, a premonition of what was to come? I could feel my heartbeat pounding in my ears, my palms growing sweaty with fear. The woman's voice, once soothing, now felt like a cold hand gripping my heart. I couldn't shake off the eerie feeling that her fiction was becoming our reality. As the last station approached, I was ready to bolt, to escape this seemingly ominous situation. The rhythm of the train against the tracks became a heartbeat, loud and insistent, echoing my own. I could almost taste the freedom, the normalcy that lay just beyond the sliding doors. But then, something unexpected happened. She closed her book. The woman, who'd been so engrossed in her reading, so oblivious to my discomfort, finally looked up. Her eyes, hidden behind those spectacles, held a glint of amusement as she turned the cover of the book towards me. My breath hitched as I read the author's name. It was hers. A wave of realization washed over me. She was the architect of the tale that had me on edge, a master weaver of words that could make the mundane seem terrifying. She was the puppeteer who had made me dance on strings of fear and intrigue. In that moment, I was both relieved and awestruck. In the quiet cocoon of the train, the woman and I shared a moment of understanding. She knew the power her words held, the way they could manipulate reality, bringing forth monsters from the shadows of the everyday. And I was a newfound admirer of her craft, a willing participant in the theater of her imagination. The train screeched to a halt, jolting me back to reality. As I stepped onto the platform, I turned back one last time. She was still there, a silhouette against the dim lighting of the train, a book in her hands and a story on her lips. And there I was, caught in a twisted tale of fiction, only to realize I was part of the story all along. A knock resonated through the silent house, breaking the calm tranquility of my solitude. The audacity of the interruption jarred me, an unwelcome ripple in the serene waters of my peaceful abode. The day had already worn thin with the irritating encounter with Officer James, and now this, a stranger at my door as twilight draped itself over Sunlight County. Curiosity piqued, I parted the curtain, stealing a glimpse of the uninvited guest. A figure, tall and lean, shrouded in a long, dark coat, a shadowed face hidden beneath the brim of an ominous hat. The sight was eerie, a stark contrast to the comforting familiarity of my rural surroundings. My irritation ebbed, replaced by a rising curiosity that seemed to pull me towards the front door. As I turned the lock and cracked open the door, I prepared to dismiss the stranger. Yet he tipped his hat and uttered two words that froze me in my tracks. Two words, spoken so softly they were barely a whisper, yet they echoed in my mind like a deafening roar. "Beware, James." My heart pounded in my chest like a frenzied drum, the stranger's cryptic warning about Officer James reverberating through the silence of my quiet farmhouse. It was an icy blade of dread, slicing through the mundane tranquility of my evening. The stranger, with his long coat and hat hiding his face in shadow, had left as mysteriously as he had arrived, leaving me alone with my thoughts and his unsettling message. "Beware, James." The words seemed to hang in the air, a spectral echo that refused to fade. I found myself pondering the stranger's warning. What could it mean? Was it a threat, an omen, a prophecy, or simply the ramblings of a madman? And most importantly, what was his connection with Officer James, the disingenuous lawman who had bothered me earlier in the day? As the questions swirled in my mind, so too did the tension rise, coiling in my stomach like a sleeping serpent. This quiet farming community of Sunlight County, my home, suddenly felt unfamiliar, its peaceful facade shattered by the eerie encounter with the stranger. I could have dismissed it all as a bizarre coincidence, a freak occurrence that held no real meaning. But the underlying sense of uneasiness, the prickling sensation at the back of my neck, told me otherwise. The stranger's warning about James was not something I could ignore. It was a puzzle, a riddle that demanded to be solved. And as the night deepened, casting long shadows across the room, my curiosity transformed into a resolve. I had to find out the truth behind the stranger's message. I had to understand why he had chosen me, of all people, to warn about James. I had to uncover the links that connected me, the stranger, and Officer James in this intricate web of mystery. Intrigued and now apprehensive, I decided to delve deeper into this unexpected mystery. As I began my investigation, I found myself falling deeper into a rabbit hole of unanswered questions. With a newfound determination, I started my inquiry into the unsettling facts surrounding Officer James. The first few layers of my investigation were much like peeling an onion, revealing a stench of corruption and deceit that was hard to ignore. Officer James, the man whose badge was a symbol of safety and trust, was now an enigma I couldn't quite decipher. As I delved further, I stumbled upon a series of unexplained disappearances in Sunlight County. Each case was a chilling echo of the next, all of them sharing the same eerie pattern: a stranger visiting in the evening, and by morning another citizen of our quiet community was nowhere to be found. The unsettling common thread: Officer James was always the first on the scene, his explanations vague and his actions shrouded in ambiguity. The suspense built like a symphony reaching its crescendo, the notes of mystery and fear intertwining into a haunting melody. I was caught in the middle of a puzzle, each piece more confounding than the last. The stories of the missing individuals hung in the air like a heavy fog, their faces a stark reminder of the danger lurking in the shadows. The investigation took on a life of its own, consuming my thoughts and tugging at the edges of my sanity. I was wading through a sea of unknowns, the waves of dread crashing over me with every revelation. Officer James, the stranger, the disappearances, they were all pieces of a sinister jigsaw puzzle, the image slowly coming into focus. As the days turned into nights and the nights into a blur, I found myself drawn into the heart of the mystery. I was no longer an outsider looking in, I was the protagonist in a story of deceit and danger, my life intertwined with those who had vanished without a trace. Each clue I discovered was more disturbing than the last, leading me to a horrifying revelation. A chill ran down my spine as I pieced together the horrifying truth. The puzzle pieces of this terrifying enigma began to fall into place one by one, revealing a picture far more sinister than anything I could have ever imagined. It was Officer James, the same man who had irked me earlier in the day, the same man who was supposed to protect and serve this small community. Officer James was not just an annoyance, a thorn in my side. He was the puppet master behind the vanishing townsfolk, pulling the strings from behind the scenes. My mind raced back to the countless stories of missing people, the unexplained disappearances that had plagued Sunlight County for years. It was him, it had always been him. The stranger, the tall thin man in a long dark coat who had come knocking at my door, he was not the predator. He was the harbinger, the one who carried the warning. His 2 words, "Beware James," echoed in my mind, a chilling prophecy that now made perfect sense. My heart pounded in my chest like a drum as the gravity of my situation sunk in. I was alone, in the middle of nowhere, with a monstrous predator lurking in the shadows. I was the mouse in a cat-and-mouse game, and the cat had been playing with me all along. A cold sweat trickled down my forehead as I realized the imminent danger I was in. I was not safe, not in my own home, not in this quaint little town that was supposed to be my haven. I was a pawn in a deadly game, a game that I had no idea how to play. I stood there, frozen in terror, as the chilling reality of my predicament washed over me. I was living a nightmare, trapped in a horror story that had no end in sight. I was the next victim, the next name to be added to the list of the missing. And just as the realization hit me, I heard another knock on the door.